Avinash has the pleasure of giving our last talk, and I won't put any pressure on him saying he's the last thing standing to us and having our cocktail hour outside. But the good news is we're in good hands because this is a paper that was initially done under last year's grant program that didn't have the results, and we're now in a position to actually hear and get it to the next stage. So we're delighted to have you here. For people who are doing CLE, the first word for this final hour is the word computer. And Avinash, your paper, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Christopher. So I want to thank Christopher, Rakesh, Giovanna, and Carolyn, and the rest of the team at the center for generously supporting our research and also putting together a wonderful conference like online last year and again in person this year. So we really appreciate your support. So today I'm going to talk about a paper which we've been working on about trying to measure the value of data for consumers on online platforms. So we have earlier heard the talk by Simone, and there's also a lot of research being conducted over the past few years trying to look at the value of data. In terms of the empirical side of it, we have seen some papers looking at the value of data to firms and platforms. In this paper, we're looking at the consumer side and trying to quantify how much do people value their data. But we all know that how much people value their data depends on the context, right? So what we do with the data, who is asking that question and things like that. So the focus in this paper is not to pinpoint a number on the value of data, but rather to look at information asymmetries in valuations of data. Are people when you provide people with some information treatments, do they update their valuations of data or not? And also to look at the underlying heterogeneity in terms of valuations and also updating across different groups, including demographics. So let's dive into the paper. So I don't really have to motivate this paper to this audience. We heard earlier the talk by Simone. We all know how important data is to platforms. So it's used in every important decision, including algorithmic recommendation, newsfeed algorithms, and various other things. But increasingly, there is this growing concern that most of the value which is created through users' data, it goes mostly to the platforms. It doesn't really much of it doesn't really go towards consumers. So there is this growing concern about inequality and this sharing of this value, and we see proposals being raised in the US and EU. For example, in California, there was a proposal about making companies share the value they create with from users' data back with the users. There's also some proposals in the European Commission, taxing targeted advertising and potentially, maybe rebating some of that value back to consumers. We're also seeing increasingly some movements among some social movements. For example, there is one nonprofit in the US started by Andrew Yang called the Data Dividend Project. And what they're trying to do is, trying to sign up lots of users and trying to create kind of a lobby group for these users and go and negotiate with big tech companies, potentially negotiate payments for their data from big tech platforms. So this concept of creating markets for personal data where people are kind of paid for giving up their data to platforms, this concept has existed in the academic literature since a while. And recently, we've also seen this popularized more by, for example, people like Glenn Whale and co-authors. When they talk about data as labor, right? People getting compensated for the data they contribute to big tech platforms. We're also seeing recently companies reacting to this trend. For example, we are seeing some emerging business models. For example, there's a search engine we came across, started by former Google ad executives, which is a subscription-based search engine. They charge $5 to $6 a month. They claim to provide very high-quality results, but they don't collect any user data, and it's not advertisement-based model. There are also some data markets being established. For example, one of the company we work with for this experiment, which is YouGov, they're creating a product, where their panelists, who have already signed up with YouGov, can link their, social media profiles or e-commerce profiles or their Spotify profile or Netflix viewing history. And in exchange for that, they get like a monthly or a yearly payment in exchange for linking their accounts. And earlier I mentioned about some of the social movements as well. So we're seeing like a lot of companies reacting to this trend, and also like companies in the Web3 space. Like for example, this one company called Permission, creating like a marketplace for data where people can link their profiles in exchange for like compensation. Yeah. So this is an example of one of these data marketplaces. Like it's called Neprism. So they're trying to create a two-sided marketplace, like where people link their data, like with this marketplace, in exchange for like third parties buying data from them, and they get compensated for it. And one of the ways they're trying to attract their user base is trying to like educate people about how much money these big tech platforms are making from your data, and trying to recruit them by showing that message. And this is actually like, looking at something like this, like informs some of the information interventions we try out in our experiments. Because the concern is like, right, like the average person is not really aware about like how much money are, do these big tech platforms make from their data. And potentially once you educate them or, inform them about this, like, that might change their valuations. And they might be more willing, like, to sell their data at a higher price compared to without that information or not. So this is like one of the real-world example, which is kind of like a motivating example for some of our information treatments. So the key challenge, right, with creating any kind of data marketplace or thinking of concepts like data dividends is like oftentimes like users are not really aware of how much value they put on their data. Like it's a very hard question if you ask someone, how much do you value your your personal photos which you have shared on Facebook, right? Like it's a very tough question to answer because of information asymmetries, right? Like so there are two types of information frictions which we explore more in this paper. So one is like looking at how much value firms make from your data. So for example, in the case of Facebook, right? Like how much money does Facebook make from your data? And if you inform people about that, like does that change their valuation or not? The other kind of information friction we look at is the cost associated with misuse of data. So for this information treatment, we look at one of the recent legal settlement in the US where Facebook was involved in a kind of a data breach, and the court mandated that Facebook is required to pay its users like this much amount of dollars. So people might not really be associated with, might not be familiar with like the cost associated with misuse of their data. So if people aren't really sure about like how much they value they put on their data, and if you try to create a data marketplace, then that would lead to like inefficient outcomes. And that would lead to like inefficient like value sharing between the platform and the consumer. So that's kind of like the underlying motivation behind our research. So what do we do in this paper? So in this paper, basically we focus on Facebook. In some other smaller scale studies, we also look at different platforms like Twitter and Instagram. But in the main experiment, we focused on Facebook data. And the main question we ask is like, if we provide users with real world information about how much money Facebook makes from your data, and how much did the courts decide your data was worth, when it was involved in some legal settlement. Once you provide people with those, real world information, do people change their valuation of their data or not? And in this process, we also look at the distribution of valuations and analyze like heterogeneity across different groups, like more specifically race, gender, and income. So do we see like heterogeneity in valuations across these three groups, and heterogeneity also in updating of valuations across these groups once you're provided with real-world information. So this is basically what we do. So yeah, go ahead, yes.
When you say valuation here, should I think about willing to accept?
Yeah, so we basically buy people's data from them. Yes, yes, yeah. Yes.
Yeah, so let me ask the other part of this. When you say data, do you mean my fixed characteristics or my browsing history or both?
Yeah, so in this paper, the data we look at is your entire stock of Facebook data which you've created on the platform. So like, all the data Facebook has on you, all your posts, comments, likes, messages, photos.
Would people's behavior change if they knew that there was a benefit to clicking on the New York Times or something?
Yeah. So that's a good question. So we could, that's one of another interesting information treatment we could explore, like explaining about the benefits of that data. So we don't check that, in this particular paper. Yes.
Am I right in saying that you ask these people that you do experiment on things with before telling them how much money Facebook make? How much do you value your privacy or something like that, and then you review them and then ask them how much does it worth to you now? Is that true?
Yeah, something like that. So we get baseline valuations, we provide some information treatments, and we see if they update their valuations or not.
Well, I mean, which one it actually matters in terms of policy? That's my question.
Yeah.
I mean, I know Facebook is making a lot of money out of my data, and then that's why I want to ask them for more money.
Yeah.
It's different from, well, actually, I don't really care about my privacy, right? So before you tell me the information, my value or whatever dollar sign would be like zero.
Yeah.
So, I mean, in terms of policy.
So I think that's a great question. It depends on what question you're trying to answer, I guess. Like if the question is more about like, can you create information campaigns, which might influence people's valuations, then we would probably look at who is more likely to update and who is like less likely to update. If the question is like, something else about, looking at the state of the world right now without awareness about Facebook's valuation and then we would probably be more interested in the baseline valuations. But one thing I want to clarify, so the exact dollar amounts, as I said, would change based on, who is asking the question, what you do with the data, and, all these contextual factors. So that's why, it's like there's no one single number, right, for the baseline valuation. But one thing we could still look at is, for the baseline valuations, looking at heterogeneity across different groups, like comparing higher income versus lower income people, or across genders and things like that. So that is something we do in this paper.
A follow-up question. So one thing is to say, okay, Facebook is making X dollars per year, $50 a year from you, and I learned that this reduces the informational friction, and then perhaps these $50 come from advertisers who pay to have access to me, and I'm not bothered. Actually, I may even like to receive particular ads. And so this is about sharing that rent with Facebook. Because I'm going to say, okay, I want 50% of it. So I want $25. But another thing, if you tell me it's still $50, but this $50 comes from, I don't know, somebody who is gonna price discriminate or gonna sell me something, and it's something I really hate. So it's not the $50. I don't want to give you it at any time. So so how are you gonna distinguish between these two? You said it's context specific, but the response to how should I interpret your?
So in the main experiment, we keep it ambiguous. Like we don't tell them what Facebook does with your data. We don't tell them what we do with their data once we get them, because the main analysis focuses more on who is updating, how much are they likely to update, heterogeneity across different groups. In a follow-up study, we also manipulate things not from the Facebook side, not Facebook does with your data, but we manipulate, for example, what we do with their data. If we get their data from them and go and sell it to a third party versus using it for research purposes, and see if that changes some of the results or not. But you're right, so whenever we present this stuff, you could do all kinds of information interventions, and you're right, one interesting thing would be try to explain what Facebook does with it, targeting of ads, price discrimination and all those other things, but we don't do that.
But is that the core of the privacy policy is captured by this purpose limitation, which is telling the customer what the data is going to be used for, and you don't tackle this key aspect in the policy intervention. What's the purpose for the data collection if you don't inform the consumer about it? It's not privacy then, it's another thing.
So I'm not saying this is a paper about the value of privacy, you're right, Right. But yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
There's a
Yes.
question online. Could another treatment be revealing to consumers estimates of willingness to pay for the free content they're receiving in an ad business? You know,
Yeah.
they're getting free content. That's the
Right.
That's the barter, right?
Yes.
So how do we capture that here, or is there a way to capture that here?
Yeah. So you mean like how much benefits they're getting from that free content?
Yes.
So I have a ton of other research, which was most of my dissertation work, where I try to measure that part of it. Like, so it's actually very similar to this, using the same method, but looking at the benefit side of it, like, how much do I have to pay you to, like, stop access to that free content, or like stop using one of these platforms, or stop. Yeah. So we can measure that through similar methods. We don't inform them about those benefits in this paper. Again, we could like try out all kinds of information interventions, but like, because we have limited power, so yeah.
But it's just, you're
Yeah.
agnostic now about sort of general welfare implications. You're just looking at dispersion of valuation,
Yeah.
not even absolute value. It just begs like to put your two lines of research together to try to get some traction on this from a policy standpoint.
Yeah. Okay, so that's a good point. So basically, looking at the benefits and the costs of like data sharing, informing them about all that, and see if how they update their valuations once they get all this information.
Because the bottom line, people love free.
Right.
And I when I teach privacy, my students,
Yeah.
I tell them all the stuff,
Yeah.
we use the Google platforms,
Yeah.
and ask their willingness to pay afterwards.
Right. Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah. So one thing about this setting is like it's not like Facebook is buying their data from them. So they generate the data on Facebook, and then now they are kind of selling that to a third party. So like something relevant in the policy space, would be like you have all these regulations now about like interoperability and things like that. So people exporting their data and potentially taking that to a different platform, or even getting paid for it by selling it to a third party. So our results would be more applicable to that kind of setting. But you're right. Like we could also test out some of these other information interventions. Yeah. So one thing we did notice is like to do these experiments properly, because as I'll explain that in a second. So this is not like cheap talk survey questions, but we are like actually doing with real incentives and actually paying them real money. So the costs like blow up pretty quickly. So it's like we have to keep the
That's why they didn't agree.
yeah. So thanks for the generous funding. Yeah.
Best use for it.
Yeah. Yes.
What do you think about the relationship between my valuation that I state and my ability to extract it?
Yeah.
If there are millions of people like me, there's
Yeah.
lots of competition, so
Yeah.
I may say 10, but I can get away with a fraction of that.
Yeah. So this goes to your externality points, right? Which you were.
No, it's just market power.
Right. Oh,
I
market
have
power.
I have no bargaining power whatsoever.
Right. Yeah. So in this study we don't look at that aspect, but you're right. Like if there are lots of people like you in the market selling their data, that would probably also influence valuation for your data. Yeah. So basically what we do is like we run an online experiment and where we kind of solicit people's valuations for their Facebook data. The main experiment which we do is by partnering with YouGov. So we get a representative sample of the US national population, around 4,000 people, and that's where we do like most of our studies. We also do a parallel study where we have partnered with the Data Dividend Project, which I was talking about earlier, which is a non-profit. Most of the user base of that particular project, it's highly privacy-focused individuals like who are passionate about data rights. So one contribution of this paper is we are able to do some of our experiments on highly privacy-focused individuals. Because if you look at most of the literature on privacy, right, like it's hard to get people who are really privacy focused to take part in an online experiment. But in this paper, we are able to do that by getting buy-in from like some of the basically the people who created the nonprofit. So we're able to like reach out to the user base and invite them to take part in our experiment, and through that channel we get around 650 responses in addition. So all of them, the user base we focus on, so all the people taking part in our study have a Facebook account because we are trying to measure valuation of Facebook data. So this is basically the key valuation question we ask. So this is basically, the valuation question, it uses something, most of you are familiar with the experimental literature. It uses something called the BDM approach. So we basically ask people to, share what is the minimum amount of money we would have to pay you so that you share all of your Facebook data with us. So the way this process works is, so Facebook has a feature which lets you export all of your data on the platform as a zip file, and you can download it. So this is like all the data you've created since you joined the platform. So all your messages, likes, photos, like even private messages, like everything you've created on the platform. So you enter your valuation, like, how much do I have to pay you, so that you share all that with me. So you enter a number, and then we draw a number from a distribution. And if the price which we draw is more than what you enter, then you get paid whatever price we draw, if and only if you share your data with us. So users actually share their data with us, and we have like a tool which verifies if the data they're uploading is like if the file structure and format is correct, if they're not just uploading junk files. And once we verify that, they get actual cash. If the number which we draw, if the price which we draw is less than their valuation, then they don't get any amount, and they also don't have to share any data. So this is like with this is like an incentive compatible approach, and it's pretty high stakes because you are giving up like all of your data, including private messages. So this is, I think, also another contribution of this paper, because most of the privacy literature experimental work looks at data, things like your email addresses or demographics, but in this, like, we look at your entire stock of Facebook data. Yes.
I'm sure you've done that, but how do you make sure they don't have multiple big Facebook accounts?
Yeah, so we asked that, so potentially they could have it. I think for Facebook in particular, like according to the official terms, like you're supposed to use your real account, real name, and you can only have one personal account.
Yeah.
Of course, some of them might have more than one account, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm not saying myself, but I mean, I know
Right.
people have multiple accounts.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right, it's possible. We don't have control on that aspect. Yeah. Yes.
So you might have said this before, but what do you tell subjects about what you do with the data?
Yeah, so we don't tell them anything, so they don't know what we're going to do with the data. In some follow-up robustness studies, we try to manipulate what we do with the data and see if there are differences or not in terms of what we find. But in the main experiment, of course, they know we are researchers. We don't lie. There's no deception involved. So they know we are professors, but we don't tell them what we do with that data.
So do you see accounts that without much data in the Facebook account? Is that common?
So the people we actually ask, who end up uploading, like most of them, upload like files which are like even 300-400 MB or a few GB. So they actually have created a lot of data. Okay. And we also have some data on like how old is their Facebook profile and how much time they spend on the platform. So most people, I guess like the average person in this sample is like not, I guess they were active back, a while back. They're not active right now, but overall, since they created the account, they have generated quite a bit of data. Yes.
And how do you know that they actually did share everything with you?
So another thing is because of IRB reasons, like we don't tell them, but we don't actually download their data and look at their data manually because it's like private information. So we kind of wrote a script which just looks at like the file name, structures and all, you're right, like someone who is technically sophisticated might, suppress some of it and but if they upload some other file, we would know. But if they upload like their Facebook data file, but they might have deleted some lines from it, we wouldn't know that. But that's possible. Yeah.
And just a side issue, my data means the messages I send as well as the ones I receive from others?
Yes, so that's another interesting thing, right? When you export your Facebook data, it contains like also the messages you've received from others. And also like, for example, the comments you've posted on someone else's post, which raises lots of questions about like who exactly owns the data because, yes.
Are you concerned that people from the data dividend project know about IRBs and therefore, might basically, and that this might somehow impact your experiments in ways that are, negative in some sense?
So they might know about IRB, but like they might not. I think it's tough. It's tough to say, like because some IRBs might have allowed us to even save that personal data, right? Like for example, actually I forgot to mention the co-authors on this project. So it's Ananya and Alex, who's a PhD student, and Alessandro, who's the other co-author. For example, Alessandro's experiments where he has collected social security numbers from people, and the IRB did allow him to do that. So it's possible, right? Like that IRB might have allowed us to save that data. So
so essentially they might know that you're basically not allowed to do anything harmful with it, right? So
it's possible. Like they may be more aware about experiments or IRBs or universities in general. But an interesting thing is, like, I'll show that later, but like they demand like higher valuations than the general population. So if they thought that we wouldn't really do, the valuations would be lower. So as I was explaining, so we use a BDM approach and solicit like incentive compatible valuations for giving up your Facebook data. So in the end, we pay in addition to compensation for taking part in the study, we pay a few $1,000s in total for the people who have been participating in our study. So this is a very high stakes setting with real money on the table, involving personal data, which is quite different from most of the literature estimating valuations of data when they look at email addresses and demographic information. So we solicit valuations, like baseline valuations for data, and then we provide them with information treatments. The first information treatment which we provide is looking at Facebook's revenues. So we tell them looking at Facebook's SEC filings, that Facebook is going to make $400 over the next few years on average. And once they get this information treatment, so this is a real number based on real data. So once they get this information treatment, they're given a choice, if they want to update their valuation or not. And if they choose to update, they can enter their new valuation. And the new valuation is what is entered in the BDM lottery. So the updates and the revisions are also incentive compatible. So this is one information treatment we try out. And then the other information treatment we try out is we tell them about this recent lawsuit in Illinois where Facebook was ordered to pay $400 as well to the average, to everyone who was affected in that particular lawsuit. So I think every Facebook user in Illinois was eligible to get that award. So this $400 amount, it's like real world information, but we also chose it so that it's similar across both of these information treatments, so that we can see if, in addition to the dollar amount, the other aspect of this information treatment, so whether it's related to value which the firm makes from your data versus how much did the courts decide your data was worth because of a breach, if that part of the information treatment also affects their valuations or not. So users are randomized into one of these two information treatments, and they're given a chance to update their valuations. So let's look at the baseline distribution of valuations before users are given the information treatment. So this is how the distribution looks like. So it's a very bimodal distribution. So you have a mass of users who value their data at less than $300-400, and then on the other hand, you have a mass of users who really value the data at like very high amounts. Looking at the median valuation for the representative sample, the median valuation of Facebook data is $750. So this is a very high number, but this is basically for your entire stock of Facebook data, so including your messages and everything you've created on the platform. So on the right-hand side, right, like there are a bunch of people who express like extremely high valuations. So here we have cut off the graph at $10,000 because some of them enter like absurd numbers like $1 million or trillion or whatever the biggest number they could think of. And we also have some other questions in the experiment. So these are individuals who really believe in privacy as a fundamental human right, and by revealing a very high number, they are expressing their unwillingness to give up their data no matter how much we pay them. One second. So we also have in some follow-up studies, we have some inline questions asking people, about, once we solicit their valuation, like how likely do they think, they're actually going to get that amount of cash. So what we find is like up to even like as high valuations as like $4,000 to $5,000, like people actually think that they have a shot at getting that amount. So these numbers like, up to even like as high as like several $1,000s are still incentive compatible because people think that they actually have a shot at getting it. And we pay out people as well, like, the highest we pay out is like around $400, but, the distribution which we draw from, it could theoretically pick anyone even with high valuations. Yeah, so there were a few questions.
I think I think you partially answered that. So I was trying to ask if the people know in advance the distribution that you're going to draw the value from, and is that going to affect how they report, especially on the right scale?
So in the main experiment, we don't tell them about the distribution, but in a follow-up experiment, we do several different things, like for robustness. We change the distribution with like more weight towards higher valuations. We also like inform them about the distribution or not, and the results are like very similar. But in the main experiment, like the standard practice in the BDM approach is like the best practice is you don't reveal the distribution from which you're drawing the valuations from. Yes.
So I guess there's some caution in how to interpret these answers because, for example, I don't have a Facebook account.
Yeah.
But I do have an Instagram account.
Yeah.
And you can have the content of that for free whenever you want because I haven't posted anything on that account.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, I value my privacy very highly.
Yeah.
Precisely that reason, my account has zero content. So have you looked at some crude measures as to how much do those files actually contain, and do they correlate with these values? Because I can also imagine that it could go sometimes the other way.
Yeah. So we do have some measures of like usage, like how much, how often do they use Facebook and things like that. We control for that when we do our analysis. Like I think I forgot like the analysis between valuations and usage. I don't know if you remember if we did that particular analysis.
I think we did with how old the account was.
Right.
Yeah, and so I think older accounts do value their data more.
Yeah.
So
but we do have measures for like usage, and in all our like analysis, we do control for like how often do they use it, how long have they been on the platform and things like that. Yes.
No, my question was just addressed.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But the main takeaway from this figure is like this bimodal distributions, like a mass of users who have low valuations, a mass of users like who are not willing to give up their data, like no matter how much we pay them. So their valuations are more like expressive, like those numbers, like I wouldn't, like they would not give up their data, like no matter how much we pay them. So looking at the baseline valuations and looking at heterogeneity across some of the demographics, like what we find is like looking at differences by race. What we find is like white users of Facebook in our sample seem to value their data much more than black users. And this difference, like, so this is basically a CDF of the valuations I showed before. So x-axis, the dollar amount, and on the y-axis, it's the share of the population whose valuation is at that dollar amount or less. So it seems like throughout the distribution, like white users seem to value their data much more than black users. Similarly, looking at gender, what we find is male users seem to value their data much more than female users. And the gender result is interesting because there is some other research, for example, this paper by Catherine Tucker and Anya Lambert, which looks at the value of like data to firms, and what they find is advertisers seem to value like women's eyeballs more than men's eyeballs. But here, looking at the other side of the equation, what we find is like women seem to value their data less than men. And this is after controlling for their Facebook usage and their income and other demographics. Similarly, like also looking at income, what we find is the valuation monotonically increases with income. So the richer you are, the more you seem to value your Facebook data. This result also, I think, is interesting because in my other research, looking at valuation of Facebook, the whole platform, like Facebook, there isn't really a monotonic relationship with income. Like both richer and like lower income individuals seem to value Facebook like similarly. But looking at the Facebook data, like higher income people seem to value it more than lower income people. And in line with intuition, like the more privacy focused sample seems to value their data much more than the nationally representative sample. So these are some of the baseline results. Looking at what happens once we provide them with the information treatment and what do they do, what happens to their valuations. Yes, we have a question.
I don't want to slow them too much, but do you have age? Like I'd be very interested.
Yeah.
Yeah. Younger people seem to be much more
Yeah.
liberal with their data.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Is that like, do you not have that? Or
We have age. I forgot the result for age, but
I think we just control for it, and
but we never. Yeah. We should maybe draw a similar figure with age as well. Yeah. Yes.
Do you have a sense? Did you ask these people controlling for income? It's surprising that African American population might be less concerned about their data, given that they are more likely to be subjected to discrimination. The same for women. Did you ask them like what might be, how they feel about sharing their data, or what might generate this difference?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we do ask them some open-ended questions about like once they get the information treatment, like if they update or not, and why did they update or not. So
I can imagine income generating the difference, but you say that you control for income.
Right. We do control for it. So in this paper, like, we don't really have good answers for like why these differences are emerging. What we do see is like the information treatments, for example, I'll show that later, but they seem to work more, for example, on black individuals compared to white individuals in our sample, and they seem to work better on like women compared to men. So definitely part of the story could be like that information asymmetry. But even after those information treatments, we still see differences. So we don't have answers about why that's happening. Yeah. So let's look at what happens once they get the information treatment. So this is basically the baseline valuation plotted with the revised valuation and the distribution. So as you recall, right, we gave a dollar number of $400 for the information treatment. What we see is like lots of people actually do end up updating, but it's only the lower valuation individuals who update upwards. So we feel like people whose valuation is less than 400 update their valuation upwards, like not all of them, but some of them. But we don't see like people whose valuations are more than 400 update it downwards. So there is definitely some anchoring story here, but it's not just anchoring because we only see one-sided updating. And not only that, we also see differences in updating across the two information treatments. So it's not just the dollar amount, but what the other information is present in the information treatment, which seems to like make them update their valuations. So the key result here is like updating happens, but it's only in from lower valuation individuals to like higher, but not the other way. Yes.
Sorry, but if the top is basically saying, I don't want to give you my data no matter what, right?
That's only the very top, not
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
like
But there was little mass in between. There was a lot of mass below 400, and then there was 1,000, right?
Yeah.
If the 1,000 answer is just, I will never give you my data no matter what,
Yeah.
there should be no updating, right?
Yeah, you're right, but I think we see that behavior at like over 10,000. There is still quite a bit, like you're right, there isn't too much of a mass, but there are still enough users from in between 400 to 10,000. And we don't see any updating like in that user group. And we do have in a follow-up study, like, asking them about like their beliefs about getting selected to get that actual cash. So most of them actually do think that they have a shot at getting that cash. So those are incentive compatible valuations, but we don't see any updating, in that group. So you're right, like for the extreme high valuations, like they're not going to update, like, even with information treatment. But there are still enough individuals in between 400 and 10,000. And another thing is, in some smaller scale pilot studies, we also change the dollar amount in the information treatment. So we try out with $200, $100, and I think 600 or some other amounts. For each of these dollar amounts, we see the same story. Like there's updating from lower valuation to upwards, but we don't see the other way. So we see this effect even with like different dollar amounts. So looking more closely at like, who is updating and what happens to their valuations after their update. So looking at the first column here, so this is basically the baseline valuations before they update. So controlling for various things, as I mentioned earlier, we see that women seem to value their data less than men, black individuals seem to value their data less than white individuals. And we also have some subjective questions about how much they think of privacy as a fundamental human right or not. And people who believe in privacy as a fundamental human right seem to value their data more than others. We also have some questions about beliefs in like free markets. So those who believe in free markets like seem to have like less valuations than the rest of the population. So this is the baseline valuation. In the third column, we look at what is the probability of revising once they get the information treatment. So it's exactly those demographics who have low valuations. So like women and black individuals, they're more likely to update. Controlling for the baseline valuation. So this is controlling for it. Like those groups are more likely to update once they get the information treatment. But also those who believe in markets are also more likely to update. But those who strongly believe in privacy as a fundamental human right don't update even after getting the information treatment. Yes, Cristobal?
So is the result of female and black robust to the income level? Because there is like a income gap between
this is like
female, white, black.
Yeah, those results control for the income as well. Yeah. And once the updating happens, like looking at in column 2, looking at the valuations post the information treatment, so once the updating happens, the differences, the gender and the race differences still continue to persist. So there is some updating for these demographics, but the gap between them and the other groups doesn't go away even after the updating. So comparing the two different samples we have, so the nationally representative sample and the more privacy-focused data dividend project sample. So what we find, for example, is, as I said earlier, the data dividend project sample has higher valuations compared to the nationally representative sample, presumably because they are more private and they value their data more. But even in that group, we see very similar updating behavior. So we still see, like, in that group as well, similar amounts of people who update their valuation upwards. So those whose valuation was less than 400 are more likely to update it upwards. So even like, more engaged individuals who are probably more knowledgeable potentially about Facebook's data valuations, even they seem to update their valuations at similar levels. So comparing the two different treatments we have, like the revenue treatment, telling them about how much money Facebook makes, and the settlement treatment, telling them about how much the courts decide the data was worth. What we find is the settlement treatment has a bigger effect than the revenue treatment. So the settlement treatment causes more people to update than the revenue treatment. But why is that the case? So we do a follow-up study, and what we find is more people are unaware about the Facebook's settlement compared to Facebook's revenues. So people have less information about that. So that's why that information seems to have a higher effect. Towards the end of the experiment, we also have some open-ended text responses asking them why did you update or why did you not update, and to try to solicit what made them update. And we analyze the text data as well. And what we find is the content in the information treatment seems to matter a lot. When we talk about Facebook's value, how much money Facebook makes from your data, they start to think about how much money the platform is extracting from their data, and they reveal that in their text responses. Compared to the settlement case, when we talk about how much did the courts decide your data is worth when it was breached, then they start thinking about data breaches, security, and they express feelings of that they are going to be more private moving forward, and things like that. So depending on the content of the information treatment, it seems to invoke different responses to in terms of updating behavior. So since we presented this paper 6 months back or so, we submitted it to a journal, got a bunch of reviews, and to respond to those reviews, we've been running several different robustness studies, several follow-up experiments. So of course the first result, which is what I have already presented, so we find similar results in terms of updating and heterogeneity for the nationally representative sample and the privacy focused sample. We do another follow-up experiment because one concern with our approach could be we solicit baseline valuation, provide them with an information treatment, and ask them if they want to update or not. So there could be potentially experimental demand effects, right? Because if we ask them a second time, they're probably more likely to update. So we do a placebo test where we don't provide them with any information treatment and simply ask them if they want to update or not. And we find that only 1 to 2% of the sample updates in that case versus 28 to 30% when we provide them with our information treatments. So we don't really see evidence for experimental demand effects in our setting. We do another experiment where we vary what we do with their data. So we tell them we might use your data for research purposes, or we might use it for commercial purposes, so selling it to a data broker or not. So across these two different conditions, we don't really find any differences in baseline valuations. So at least in this particular context, what we do with the data doesn't really seem to change their valuation. We also change the method we use to solicit their valuations. So in the main experiment, we use the BDM approach where they name their price and then we draw a lottery from a distribution. We also use another simpler method, like a take it or leave it approach, where we give them a particular dollar amount, like $50 or $100 or $1,000, and ask them would you give up your data for that amount or not? And valuations are very similar across those two conditions. Within BDM, as I said earlier, we also try out different versions of it. We either share the distribution with them or not, or we use a different distribution with more weight towards higher valuation individuals. And across all these conditions, we still find very similar valuations. There is no significant differences in baseline valuations. And then, as I said at the beginning of the presentation, we also do some other smaller scale studies looking at Twitter and Instagram data. So all of these other platforms also let you export your data. So we find very similar distribution, baseline distribution, which is bimodal, differences across different demographic groups. We also test some information treatments, as I said earlier, using different dollar amounts. Similar updating behavior, lower valuation individuals update upwards, but we don't see the other way happening. So tons of follow-up studies, the results seem to be quite robust. Yes.
Sorry, just a clarifying question. On the use, you find no difference in terms of the stated valuation, the extent of the updating?
So no difference. So no difference in the baseline distribution of valuation, but not stated. It's like it is revealed, like it is incentive compatible. Sure. Right. But we don't look at the updating in that particular case because to test updating we need a much larger sample, and yeah, we didn't have the budget for that. So several different robustness studies, like the results seem to we were also surprised, like they always end up being very similar no matter different context, different method, etc. So to conclude basically, yes.
Real quick, back on that last slide. I mean, I'm very surprised. Like, the stuff you're asking about Facebook is very personal. Twitter,
Yeah.
I'm tweeting. It's a silly thing. So, I mean, it's surprising that it's so comparable across the two.
So the numbers are much lower for Twitter. So the average for Facebook was $750. For Twitter, it's like much less, like a tenth of that or something like that. But the distribution, like the bimodal distribution and gender and race differences, like were similar. So basically, to conclude, like we're trying to make two contributions to the literature. So first, there's all this literature on privacy valuations, right? So in this paper, we are focusing more on information treatments, like if they change people's valuations or not, and also like if they change, if different demographics, are more likely or less likely to respond to information treatments or not. So that is one contribution of this paper. The other literature we're trying to focus on is looking at this literature on heterogeneity in valuations. So here, what is unique in our setting is, as I said earlier, the stakes are really high. Like it's like your personal data. So the valuations are much higher than what we found previously. And also, the method is incentive compatible because some of the papers previously were using just a survey stated response question. So this is what we did so far, and moving forward in some follow-up research, we are trying to look at more personalized information treatments. In one paper with Ananya and Joy Wu from Munich, what we are trying to do is showing people about how much of your data is already out there in terms of data brokers. So what we do is we get people onto the experiment, expose them to what all information is already out there, what all information do brokers have on you already. And once you know that, do you update your valuations of data? Do you become more or less private? Are you also willing to pay, to delete your data from data brokers or not? So questions along that direction. So that is something we are doing next, and we will submit another proposal for that project. Yes, Gary.
I'm trying to understand the policy implications of these willingness to pay amounts, because from Facebook's perspective, most of the data you're talking about is actually a cost to them. It's not a benefit, right? Like having a whole bunch of people's photos and messages, they're paying for the service that the consumer is getting.
Yeah.
So I guess, how should I think about this from a policy perspective?
Right. So from a policy perspective, I think, as I said earlier, this would be, kind of creating a data marketplace. So it's like you take your data from Facebook and you sell it to another party which might be interested in that data, and see how much do you get compensated for it. So for Facebook itself, it's they don't really get much from messages and photos perhaps, but some other party might might be willing to buy it from you, right? Yes.
Sorry, but following up on that, say you tell me Facebook can make 400 out of your data, but there is no reason for me to believe that you have the same technology or whatever to make as much money out of that. Maybe you can make 40, maybe you can make 1,000. And if I knew that, I could say 300, which means you don't buy my data, or I could say 40, You buy my data and I make money. So, I mean, what I'm gonna say depends so much on the context, it seems to me, that I'm not sure, how to interpret the information treatment that you studied.
Right. So, so what you're saying is like, depending on, if you think you can, like Facebook's ability to extract value from your data is different than how much you could extract it yourself. Like, is it?
No, as a researcher, you said, you give it to me, I'm a researcher.
Right, yeah.
Like, I don't know,
Yeah.
what kind of value you're deriving from this.
Yeah.
I mean, put a different way, suppose that, I have a mug,
Yeah.
and you're asking my willingness to accept,
Right.
give you my mug.
Yeah.
And then you tell me, oh, actually, if you give it to that company,
Yeah.
they can do something, they can use it in a bar to sell coffee, and they make $10 with your mug.
Right.
What's the difference between the mug and my data in this kind of treatment?
Yeah. So one answer to that question is like when people update their valuations, like so the low valuation individuals, like for example, if someone just value their data at $20 and we give the $400 information, they don't necessarily update it to 400. They just update it upwards. So I think it's just this general knowledge about like how much money someone is making about your data, and that seems to impact your valuations. But you don't necessarily update it to the number which is being provided in information treatment. So we don't see like all those low valuation individuals updated to 400. They just update it upwards, like from 50 to 100. Some of them from 50 to 350, and like yeah. Ananya, did you want to add?
Yeah, I think that example was exactly right. The mug example. There's some sort of benchmarking going on.
Yeah.
And initially you don't have a benchmark. It's there's no real market, and so let's start with some basic information. And can we provide certain benchmarks that can be used by people? And so and as Avi said, that I think only like 5 or 6% of the people who actually update right up to $400.
But I agree. But if I'm selling the mug and I'm stating 700, and you tell me it's 400, I may significantly update it downward. But with the data, it doesn't happen. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So if I'm getting a draw about the potential value of what I have, with a mug, I may go down if the signal that I get is low, but with the data, it doesn't happen. So that might be something that speaks about the difference between the mug and we don't have the experiment with the mug, so we don't know.
Yeah.
So it's actually a follow-up experiment we were considering, but exactly, so this updating for other types of goods seems to happen from both directions, but in this context, it's like we're seeing only happen in one direction. So why that is the case, that is something, I guess,
Yeah, I mean, if you have because we've looked into some of the behavioral literature, which I think gets pretty technical quite quickly.
Yeah.
But I don't think that a standard reference point effect can explain this type of asymmetry.
Yeah.
I mean, you're here, so we're all ears if you have any ideas. But one way to sort of empirically think about it is exactly that. Okay, you have data. There's a monetary dimension to it. There's a personal, privacy dimension to it. While with a standard product, that might not be the case. So, we're trying to actually work on a very simple toy model, which might, help us think through this, and also a simple sort of experiment. But we're really running out of money now to follow up. So, but that is basically the one thing that we want to do before we send the paper back.
There's a new round of funding still opening. It's just
we have one question online that'll be our last one.
Yeah.
Is failing to know, it's interesting, it's your characterization of this as friction that they're responding to. Is failing to know a reservation price of a counterparty brilliant information friction, or just part of a normal market exchange? When I buy milk, I'm not sure of the supermarket's marginal cost.
Yeah.
A friction suggests deadweight loss, but there doesn't appear to be output effects. Not knowing what Facebook makes from selling ads isn't keeping me from using Facebook or engaging in activity. Value adds.
Right. do you want to take?
I didn't catch that.
Yeah, I didn't
So there's
catch
the question is, you're calling this we
Right,
don't
right.
know the other side's valuation.
Right.
Is that fairly characterized as a friction? It's a normal market where you don't know the reservation price of another contracting party, always. And
No,
you know,
no, wait, hold on. It is a friction in the sense that in the presence of private information, we are not guaranteed to get efficient outcomes.
yes.
Right? So in that sense, private information is a friction.
But the question is, in a market where Facebook it's an uncompensated action, not knowing their valuation in this context where it's not a paid transaction could play out a little bit differently in the sense that is my not knowing their valuation going to change my marginal behavior in terms of using Facebook as a service? And if that, in this institutional setting, isn't true, is there a deadweight loss here? That's a question, not a statement. That's what I understand the question to be asked.
So I think one thought that comes to mind is, it goes back to maybe your earlier point about, and Avi's work about, what the benefit of the service is. That's certainly there. But I think, I guess one friction which might be less to do with how Facebook views my data is the lawsuit, the settlement, where that there was a misuse of data or data breach or whatever, where there are more subjective valuations at play. Yeah. So there, I think not knowing that people are actually people or a third party, a judge or whoever has decided that $400 is a fair amount for people to get when your sort of privacy is violated, then I think there the friction might still apply in the standard sense.
Yeah.
In the other revenue, I'm not sure. But yeah, it's like we're not wedded to the terminology.
Yeah,
it's just
Right. That seems a good place to end. Please join me in thanking Avinash and Amelia for